That's a totally remarkable story, but there's another side to it. So you're describing this, as we would say, the supply side of it. They're increasing the supply of the propaganda, but there's also a rise in the demand side. I mean, you know people, you meet people, you hear people you're connected to whose kids all of a sudden decide they're transgender. Like, well, that wasn't happening 10 years ago. It was unheard of 30 years ago. What's that? Why has there been a massive rise in the number of self-identified transgender young people?
So there are currently over 700 so-called gender clinics in America.
What's a gender clinic?
Some of my friends refer to them as eugenic centers. These are presumably medical centers that focus almost exclusively on surgeries and hormonal administrations to allow people to think that they have actually changed their biological sex. They have not. If you look at pictures of women who have had healthy breasts cut off, it's so disturbing. It is so disturbing. And these clinics are quite proud of their work. They market it.
Are they run by physicians, licensed physicians?
Sadly, yes.
How can they keep their medical, if they're mutilating
the medical
people?
Establishment has gone completely over the top with this. Medical students today are being taught that biological sex doesn't exist.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, now you're upsetting
me. The
me.
medical establishment has been captured.
Well, that's terrifying.
It is terrifying. And the idea that a child can be transgender is being promoted in our schools. And a child needs to have, sometimes 1, 2, 3 fewer therapy sessions before these doctors and these clinicians are completely willing to take these children into these clinics, put them on puberty blockers. We can talk about what that means if your listeners don't know what puberty blockers are, which in almost all cases eventually end up in young people having cross-sex hormones and surgeries to mutilate their otherwise healthy bodies.
What is a puberty blocker?
A puberty blocker. Puberty blockers were initially invented because there is some small subset of children, evidently. I'm not an endocrinologist, but evidently there's some small subset of children who enter puberty at an earlier than normal age.
Yes.
And it's psychologically difficult for them, right? Puberty is difficult for anyone. But if you're entering it at, say, 8 or so,
yes,
and your peers aren't there yet, that's really hard for that kid.
Oh, yeah, horrible, yeah.
Yeah. So doctors will administer a puberty blocker with the consent of the parents, just as a way of delaying puberty a couple of years until the kid is emotionally and psychologically prepared for those kinds of changes. That's what their FDA label use is for. It's perfectly fine. It's perfectly sound and it's approved. But what is happening today is that young people who are starting puberty are being given puberty blockers because these kids are saying that they're transgender and they don't want to go through their correct sex puberty, and doctors just go along with it. So these kids are taking drugs, the effects of which are largely unknown. We do not know if they're reversible. Some people will say they are, some will say they're not.
Well, there's literally no established
protocol.
At all?
No. There's something called WPATH, World Transgender Association, something like that. WPATH is the acronym. And they promote it. But there's no established countrywide protocol for the administration of these things. In some instances, I think that some doctors think they're doing the right thing. I was talking with a woman once whose husband's a physician, and we were talking about this stuff. And she said, I'm so glad I know this because my husband is a general practitioner. And if a young person came and said, Doctor, I think I'm transgender, what my husband would do is refer them to a gender clinic, thinking that he's doing the right thing because he's not an expert in that field. So he's going to refer the kid to a gender clinic, thinking he's doing the right thing. The kid goes to a gender clinic, says, I'm transgender, gets some puberty blockers.
So we started in this tributary because I asked, why do you think there's been this massive increase in the number of self-identifying transgender teenagers?
And it's being taught in schools.
It's being taught in schools.
So it's being marketed by the clinics. It's being taught in schools. All these kids are being taught today that they can be either a boy or a girl, depending on whatever they feel like. These kids are being referred, often without parental knowledge. Schools are doing what is called socially transitioning children without telling the parents, meaning referring to them as a different name, allowing them to use opposite sex bathrooms and things like that without parental knowledge. These kids are so confused.
Isn't that, in some sense, a sexual abuse of children? I mean, that sounds like that to me.
I would argue that, yes. Yes, absolutely. I would argue that, yes. And also because there's a social contagion going on when kids are online.
Yes.
Kids are being groomed by online predators to tell their parents that if the parents don't let them transition, they will commit suicide. These parents are dealing with a situation where their children are threatening to commit suicide if they don't take them to a gender clinic. I wish I were kidding. I know this sounds extreme. Some people are probably listening to this thinking that I sound like a conspiracy theorist. The problem is that I'm not. This can all be documented. It is all documented at the 11th Hour blog, but it can be documented elsewhere. I promise you this is all happening. As insane as it sounds, it is happening.
Is there any, other than your organization, but I mean, is there any, I hate to say it, mainstream pushback against this?
No, and here's where I get into some of the things that I mentioned the last time I was on your show. Obviously, it is my party, the Democratic Party, that is pushing this agenda politically and socially and in all aspects of society. That's clear. I'm concerned that the Republican Party is not doing enough to counteract it. And I don't particularly want to be associated with Republicans.
I don't either. I know what you mean.
Except that if we're going to push back on this stuff, it's going to have to fall on them, which means Republican and conservative media. I'm so mad at conservative media right now because conservative media keeps saying transgender athlete, transgender student, transgender teacher. The Republican Party has capitulated to the language, and most Republicans that I have spoken with and heard from seem to think that transgender is some coherent category of people for whom sex is irrelevant, and it's not. And I'm upset, I'm just going to say this, I'm upset at a lot of Republicans because I have taken a lot of risks in my radical feminist liberal community for affiliating with Republicans politically on this.
Yes, I agree.
And I'm going to need Republicans to start standing up.
Well, they're cowards, and they're also, I think a lot of their voters are distressed about this. They understand on some deep level that when you unravel something as basic as sex differences, like the whole thing could come down. The thing meaning civilization. There's a lot at stake. You can't overstate how much is at stake, in my view. And I think most people sort of feel that on a gut level, like this is weird, this is bad. But their leaders
Well, I hope you're right. I really hope you're right, because my sense is that most Republicans think that this is just kind of like a weird issue over here.
No. I mean the voter, like normal people, not even Republicans, just like, really, what? This is not healthy. No one who's in it is happy. That's the other thing. I mean, let's stop lying. Like, it's not the road to happiness, actually.
Right.
And it's the road to misery, and everybody knows that. But the leaders are so intimidated by being criticized by the New York. They have this leash around their necks from legacy media who they still think are impressive or something. I don't know what it is. It's a very I couldn't agree more. And to watch someone like, some of these politicians who should really know better.
Yes.
You know who I'm talking about. It's like, it's pathetic. They're pathetic. So what is the long-term prognosis, if I can use that word, for people who have these cosmetic surgeries and these hormone treatments?
It's not good. I mean, the impact of the hormones can be devastating. It can lead to bone density loss. It can often lead to premature death. I mean, it can lead to cancer. It's really terrifying. It's really, really
terrifying. These are
terrifying.
very powerful drugs, correct?
They are very powerful drugs, and it just stands to reason if women have a natural testosterone level, right?
Yeah.
It's much lower than men's typical testosterone levels, but women have testosterone. But if we start pumping ourselves full of testosterone at higher and higher and higher levels, it does really terrible things to female bodies.
I don't even use antibacterial bar soap because I'm too afraid of the shit that's in there. Like, why do people think it's okay just to inject powerful drugs with unknown consequences into their bodies.
I don't know. I don't know.
What?
And it's the same with men who take estrogen. Men have a naturally occurring level of estrogen, but pumping their bodies exogenously, right? That's the terminology. Exogenously amping up your estrogen levels, of course it's going to be bad for you. So so it's terrible. It also it leads to sterility. So these children are also being sterilized.
Does it really?
Yes, it leads to sterility. So we've got prepubescent, sometimes young people being sterilized. Again, I wish I were kidding, but this is what's happening.
Pardon me, is that permanent, do you think?
As far as I know, yeah.
That's very heavy. I mean...
Yeah, I'm sorry. I work with this stuff all the time.
No, but it's so... I mean, if you think of the tragedy of that, I mean, some people choose not to have children, fine. But it should be something you can decide, and not at 17, right?
Younger in some cases.
But to make that decision for a child, to sterilize a child is like... That seems like a crime to me.
I think it ought to be.
Yeah.
There have been some efforts to make it a crime in some states. I think that, I would like to see district attorneys and attorneys general at the state level make some creative arguments as to why it should constitute child abuse under existing state laws that prohibit child abuse.